You are listening to Inside the Hive on the All Hornets podcast network, one podcast feed with multiple shows, making sure we cover the Charlotte Hornets from every angle. If you like what you hear, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review. The All Hornets podcast is affiliated with the Fans First Sports podcast group. Today's show, it is a solo pod by myself, James Plowright. You can find me on X at British_Buzz. No Chase Whitney this week, some scheduling conflicts. I'm going on vacation later this week where I know it will not be possible to record a podcast, so I'm going solo today. But we've got quite a lot to hit on. We have some free agency news, which we're going to hit on first, and then we're going to go straight into some Summer League breakdown. We're primarily going to focus on the Vegas Summer League so far. We had a couple of shows that have already covered what happened in the California Classic, but there has been one game. We've seen Brandon Miller. We've seen Tidjane Salaun. We're going to get into that. But first, a marquee free agency signing. Been on anticipating this. Everyone's been ready for this. The 39-year-old Taj Gibson is signed with the Charlotte Hornets. Look, this is, I think, a really smart move. I wrote an article actually earlier this week talking about the top 5 culture guys that the Hornets need to add in free agency. The idea of kind of adding that vet who basically isn't going to play, but can play a role as a leader, a second voice of a coach, can help the young guys. And I looked at a big long list of names, and Taj Gibson wasn't one of them. I had guys like Wesley Matthews, Anthony Gill, Tristan Thompson. And honestly, the reason I didn't have Taj Gibson, it's got 39. I thought he's not actually going to go like another season and finish his career in Charlotte, is he? You know, he's just gone to Washington. Then he went to Detroit. Like, he's not going to fill the trifecta of poo-poo Eastern Conference teams coming to Charlotte, is he? Well, he actually did. The guys I profiled were like 33, 34, 35, and I thought they were towards their end. Taj Gibson is hanging on here. He's got to be one of the oldest guys in the NBA outside of LeBron James. I've not actually checked that. That is something I'm going to check after the show. So, Taj Gibson, what do I think? Look, I think it's a really smart pickup. I think if you'd have told me that Taj Gibson was definitely playing and open coming next year, he would have been one of the first guys on my veterans article. Couple of interesting reasons why I think he might come here. Firstly, very much known as a Tom Thibodeau guy, Taj Gibson. Well, let's not forget the links to Steve Clifford between Tom Thibodeau. Steve Clifford, who is now working the Charlotte Hornets front office. No doubt Taj Gibson probably will have spoken to Cliff and there will have been intermediary conversations. And Thibodeau might have said to Taj, look, you're going to be treated well over there with Steve Clifford, with Charles Lee in charge. So that's the first thing I would say. The Hornets had a need, I think, in the front court. They have Nick Richards, Mark Williams. They've got small ball options with guys like Grant Williams who can play the 5. But you probably needed a little bit more interior toughness there. And I think he does add to that 3rd-point depth chart. And the great thing is that Taj Gibson is not expecting to play, right? I found a quote from when Gibson was with the Wizards where he said, I understand there's going to be nights where I may not even play, and I'm fine with that. And the Hornets haven't had many guys with that mindset and approach. And it's been something that I have been calling for, and Chase and other people, for years, right? When we've seen all these off-court issues going on, like we said, who is the veteran guy in the locker room? And for a long time, he looked at the roster and he went, well, I guess it's Mason Plumlee and Gordon Hayward, which they aren't known around the NBA for being, they're kind of like lead by example types, not guys who are going to bring people in line. Taj Gibson is not that. Taj Gibson is a vocal veteran. He is physical, tough. Again, another quote here from the then Wizards coach, Wes Unseld Jr., about what Gibson brought to the Wizards. He wrote, he's a pro's pro. He brings that intensity, physicality, aggressiveness, and he's a steadying presence for some of our young guys who get a little bit rattled at times if the game's moving fast. He's always lending an ear and being that vet and mentor, which I think is tremendous. And if there are 4 words you'd say the Hornets have needed over the last 3 or 4 years, it is intensity, physicality, aggressiveness, and, a steadying presence, right? When other teams go on these runs. So he is bringing everything that this new regime is looking for. You saw the same traits: intensity, aggressiveness, physicality in terms like Tidjane Salaun, a guy they drafted. So I really think now there's a very clear philosophy coming out from Jeff Peterson and the front office in the type of guys they're wanting to add to this team, and guys who are like young and maybe interesting, like Bryce McGowan's definitely has more potential at this point than Taj Gibson. But it's clear that Bryce McGowan's did not bring those things. And if you're not doing that in Charlotte anymore, then you're not going to be long to be here. Now, I think that raises some questions probably about their starting point guard. Some of you might be thinking right now. I don't think you'd use those terms with him. Look, if you're as good as LaMelo Ball, you're always going to get the opportunity to adjust a little bit more than maybe someone like Bryce McGowan's with. But I do think it's fair to say LaMelo's going to get some wiggle room here. And maybe he's so good that actually you just have to surround him with those guys because you can't replace that. But I do think it's important that, like, I don't think LaMelo is going to necessarily be able to get away with what he's got away with to this point in his NBA career. And it'll be interesting to see how that relationship builds going forward with the front office and ownership, which I'm going to touch on later. One final quote from Taj Gibson's time with the Pistons. James Wiseman, who's obviously a young center coming off a difficult time in his early career, said, "He's given me a lot of confidence, always speaking to me, always telling me just to play my game." Again, just more proof that Taj Gibson can play that role for a guy like Mark Williams at the center position, who's going to be challenging him, every single day in practice and in training camp. So Taj Gibson, a sensible signing, a guy, like I said, he doesn't expect to play. I think the Hornets have had too many guys wanting to play, expecting to play, and that can, you can have too many guys at times. And they're really focusing in on those they want to play and those who want to be there for a culture leadership reason. So really smart pickup, like the signing of Taj Gibson. Okay, on to part 2 of the podcast. The Hornets Summer League team 1-0 in Las Vegas after they beat the New York Knicks, who I actually thought had a pretty good roster. I would say actually in some ways maybe a more talented roster than the Hornets. They had Brandon Miller, Nick Smith Jr., but the Knicks had a lot more depth of kind of guys on their NBA journey right now. So overall thoughts, firstly, the level of competition is clearly higher in Vegas. The Knicks aren't one of the best teams, but even then you can see the Hornets' defensive pressure didn't quite force as many mistakes as it did in the California Classic. I think other teams were better at taking advantage of errors more often. I saw more instances in this game where mistakes were just completely punished on the defensive end. If people went back, if people were out of position, if people let a blow by. And they were getting away with that a little bit at the California Classic. And this is why it was a high-scoring game, right? And look, the end-of-game execution, it was a 94-90 win. The end-of-game execution was not good. And I think even Josh Longstaff, the head coach of the Summer League team, said after the game, some of this is good learning for them, but also good learning for me as head coach of how to deal with that situation a little bit better as well. So it wasn't a smooth end to the game, but they got out of there with a win. Let's hope that is a learning opportunity. I'm going to tackle each player kind of one at a time. But before I move on to the players, we got a little interview with Charles Lee during the game. I missed the Charles Lee interview. As some of you might have seen, I actually watched all the first quarter and a bit of the second on a phone while at a wedding for this Summer League game. It's a long story. People think I probably don't have a life. I actually do. I was at a wedding where I didn't really know anyone. I was the only one. My wife had another wedding the same day, so she wasn't there. So I was kind of lone rangering this wedding. And, just needed a little break. A little break from the dance floor. Band played some songs. Weren't really getting people up. Had a little break. Oh, look, some of the game's on. Just have a little seat down here and enjoy it. But look, the band came back on, had some bangers. I put the phone away and I got right back into it. So I did only watch the first quarter or so of the Summer League game. And then I caught up the next day and I was able to watch in much better detail, which I'm glad I did. Back to the Charles Lee interview. So my main takeaway from this, we've heard a lot from Charles Lee now in radio shows and interviews. We're getting a feel for him. My big takeaway was him wanting to shoot Brandon Miller to shoot more threes and less mid-ranges. He talked about how Brandon Miller was working on this play development plan right here in the game, taking a ton of threes. It was interesting because Miller didn't take many threes in college. Sorry, he didn't take many mid-ranges in college. And everyone's saying, well, what does he do apart from shoot from three? And then he came in the NBA last year and got to the mid-range, and it worked quite well. Now Charles Lee's wanting to dial that back again. Poor Brandon Miller like a yo-yo with these mid-range shots and what's being allowed. But he was still able to show some mid-range flair here and there. He had that lovely kind of like turnaround, pivoting fadeaway over Pacom Dadier. Still showing that he has that like mid-range flow in there. He also had a travel on one of those similar opportunities as well. But that's the first thing I'm looking at is this year. Expect less mid-range shots from Brandon Miller. Expect more threes. I think that will be easier this year anyway, because remember last year, Brandon Miller was playing in the second half of the season as the joint primary option with Miles Bridges. And other teams were wanting to take that three away from him constantly, right? And he kind of had to get to the mid-range as the kind of only way to counteract that. I think this year with more talent, sharing the floor with LaMelo Ball, I think he's going to get more open three-point opportunities because he's going to be able to be playing off LaMelo Ball a little bit more. So I think the year ahead will be more conducive to more threes anyway. I also thought it was interesting, Charles Lee talking about how it was good for Brandon Miller to see how he stacked up against the USA team. Obviously, Brandon Miller was part of the select team this summer. I'm really interested to see, and this is a question I want someone to ask Lee or to ask Miller at some point between now and training camp, is, well, how did he stack up against the USA guys? Charles Lee went and watched multiple practices against Team USA. Brandon Miller will have been there experiencing it himself. I'm interested to see if you kind of get any insight in terms of the areas where Brandon Miller reflected on, I need to get better in this spot here. So I'm interested to see how that works. But those are the main two takeaways really from the Lee interview. The rest of it was pretty standard. I thought it was obviously a great moment where Nick Smith Jr. had that step back kind of crossover three that sent, it might have been Kolek, I'm not sure, sent someone to the ground. And it was able to drill it, and Charles Lee enjoyed that one right there on the live on the call. So I thought that was a cool moment. Let's move on to the players, and let's start with Brandon Miller because we've already got there. Look, he played well. I think his main issues were his turnovers and his personal fouls, and some of those doubled up really as those. He had a strange travel on like some of his mid-range pivots. That was bizarre to me. He didn't really do that, but he kind of like lost his balance, it seemed a little bit. But that's a one-off. But he dribbled off his knee a few times. There was some kind of some questionable, but also some fair offensive foul calls. So, a little bit sloppier than you maybe expect. These are kind of like mistakes that sometimes you'd expect guys who are maybe in their first summer league trying to do a little bit too much to do. And Brandon Miller didn't have the cleanest game from that element. But overall, you look at his impact. I think he had 8 rebounds. I want to say he hit 4 threes. I'm just pulling it up right now in front of me. 5 threes, 23 points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists. He looked every bit of an NBA player out there. I don't think it was like this whole, he's too good for summer league. He probably is one of the players who didn't need to play, but I've really got no issue with any player playing at summer league, unless you're someone with like chronic injury issues. But even then, like if they're not a summer league, they're just playing basketball elsewhere without a camera there. So I'm really not inclined to this whole, like, let's wrap everybody in cotton wool until the first day of the regular season. Like, guys have to play. They have to play and they have to develop. But look, Brandon was getting into his three-point shot really smoothly, off the dribble, off the catch. The Knicks seemed to just like leave their big back and drop, which was not a good idea against Brandon Miller. So he was just able to walk into a lot of those threes. I liked his rebounding effort. I think that's one area of his game that I actually thought was probably a little bit disappointing last year was Brandon Miller's rebounding. He played a lot of 2 last year. I think that might contribute to it. If he is playing the 3 this year, I hope the rebounding goes up a little bit. I don't think he's necessarily got a lot bigger and stronger from what I saw. Nothing really stood out to me. I did think he had a little bit more beard, stubble coming through. He's beginning to grow up a little bit here, Brandon Miller, but didn't look too much stronger. But really, the summer is still young in NBA terms. You've got another 2 months here, really, until training camp starts up. And he's been at Team USA. He's then been at Summer League. And he's been playing a lot, probably not lifting as much. So I'd expect him to pack on a little bit more weight here in the coming months. I'm not too worried about that yet. And to be honest, for me, it's about strength. It's not even weight. I shouldn't say that because there's this idea in sports that you just need to add on weight, and that is just so like any strength and conditioning coach will like laugh at you if you say that. You need to add functional strength, and for different people, that looks differently. Okay, so that's what I'm hoping to see from Brandon Miller. I don't care if you look the same. If you're able functionally to use your strength in better ways next year, then that's good. And that was actually something else that Charles Lee did mention on his interview, was that to play through like the counter move aspects, he needs to get a little bit stronger. So when he pump fake stops, and you saw it, like he gave Dadier like a little kind of shove and then for that turnaround fader. That's what I think Lee is talking about, and also finishing at the rim as well, getting a little bit more strength there. So I think that is also a focus for the team and for Miller moving forward. I love that he tried to step in and take a charge. He didn't happen, but again, it just shows like he's playing the right way. He's trying to sacrifice his body. I thought he had some really nice defensive moments, kind of like recovering, sliding, and contesting on drives, for some really like tough mid-range floatery shots, which is exactly what you want to add. Those are my headlines really from Brandon Miller in the game. I thought he looked like a very good NBA player, stepping on the floor, just with a few sloppy moments, like the out-of-bounds pass that I think ended up getting intercepted for layup. Stuff like that. If he just taken those out of the game, I think this would have been an A. But they were there, so we can't just gloss over them. One interesting thing I want to point out is the end of the game. Brandon Miller went over and had like this funky handshake with owner Gabe Plotkin, and which I think is great, right? It's great when your star and your owner have a kind of a close relationship like that. A couple of interesting things just to keep note of. One, I always think when ownership are really close to players, it's cool from a fan perspective because it makes the owner feel like you. Okay, so I get how fans love it. It also can be really hard to then make like the right basketball decisions when you like are more emotionally connected to the players on the team, and you'll have players who you're maybe really close to and players who you're not as close to. And that dynamic, not only from an ownership level, can be difficult when deciding on moves forward, but from a player dynamic in the locker room, right? Let's say, you were another player, you don't have a handshake with Gabe Plotkin, but you think you're part of the core, and I don't know, you see Brandon Miller doing that, then chatting, you'll start to formalize this thing in your head at times, like, oh, mate, Gabe Plotkin really likes Brandon Miller. Like, they're really close. He doesn't do that with me. What does that mean? And sometimes those dynamics are just a risk. So it's something I'm just keeping an eye on moving forward. It's nothing too concerned about, but you just got to keep these little things in mind. You file them away for a later point, and then you start to add up the different puzzle pieces. Sometimes you go, oh, this kind of makes sense. Next up, Leaky Black. It's going to be pretty quick, really. I think Leaky was absolutely fine in this game. There's not many games Leaky isn't fine. 6 points, 7 rebounds, 2 assists, hit 2 threes, and that was it. He only took 4 shots, all 3-pointers, had 1 turnover, 1 steal, 0 blocks. It just kind of feels like every Leaky game where he doesn't really do too much on offense, which is fine. But the big thing is for me, I think he's a good-ish defender, but I don't think he's good enough that he's like can just be a complete nothing on offense, which complete nothing is unfair. But a limited player, like whenever he shoots the ball, it's sometimes like, oh God, I'm actually gonna have to shoot this. Okay. And he does it. And it actually looks fine, but it's just not in his mindset, I think, to be that aggressive. I just don't feel the impact of Leaky Black enough on the basketball court while I'm watching the game on both ends. You can't point to anything and go, well, what did Leaky do wrong? okay, he didn't do much wrong, but it's because his usage on both ends feels so low that I didn't really feel his contributions all the time. And it's true. In some league, you're not looking for a new primary option for your NBA team. A lot of time you are looking for, the fourth or fifth guy on the floor who can just do the sensible things. But even then, I'd expect those intangibles to pop a little bit more than they do with Leaky. But I thought he was perfectly fine. The reason I dinged him down was just because the defense this game I didn't think was quite as good. He got kind of blown by in the perimeter a couple of times. There was one good moment where he kind of switched on to Jacob Toppin and kind of like was in front, kept him in front, and ended up actually forcing him to the floor. And I think Toppin threw it away from the sideline out of bounds. So there still were those moments where you go, oh, okay, like guys feel him on the defensive end, and that's good, but they're just a little bit too far between. Let's go Nick Smith Jr. next, who had, I think, had a really positive game. Started a little bit slow, but really picked up 24 points, 9 of 17 shooting, 4 of 9 from 3, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, 3 turnovers, 3 fouls. But a team high plus 24 in the game. And he really got it going here in the second quarter and then into the second half. Offensively, I just kind of thought that he did pretty much the same as what he was doing in California Classic. Just the shots start to fall. And I said in our last podcast, I'm not really worried about Nick Smith Jr.'s lack of like offensive inefficiency from 3, because I know he can shoot the ball. And I know that that's not the area of his game that I am concerned about. It is the passing. It is the defense. Those are the areas that I'm looking for. It's his ability to score at the rim. And I will say, this game I thought was probably Nick Smith Jr.'s best game I've seen since drafting him of getting to the rim and finishing. He had a nice cut off of Jake Stevens' backdoor pass, kind of finished at the rim with his left hand. And then another one where he kind of drove to the rim and finished up and around Ariel Hukporti, the draft pick, the last pick of the second round in this year's draft, I think, with again another left-hand finish, which is definitely something to keep in mind here. Like both finishes at the rim, both with his left hand. Maybe this is going to be some type of Miles Bridges thing where actually, even though Nick Smith Jr. is right-handed, he likes finishing at the rim more with his left. Just something to keep an eye on. But I've not seen him attack the rim like that very often, and I love that he did, and didn't just get there and get blocked, but actually got some good results. So I thought that was big. Defensively, I think this was a little bit of a rough game. I have to be honest. It came and went, but Dwayne Washington Jr., who is basically who Nick Smith Jr. was primary guarding of the team, he finished with a game high 26 points, 8 of 18, 4 of 8 from 3. And I mean, at least 2 or 3 of those made threes as well. They came from Nick Smith Jr., I don't know, trying to go under a screen and getting caught up, getting a confusing switch. One was just like ball watching, and Dwayne Washington relocated a bit, and Smith Jr. was kind of ball watching and suddenly realized he'd relocated. He still has to just can't have those moments. You can't have ball watching threes given up when you're a small and you're like an inefficient player still, like Nick Smith Jr. is generally at the moment. You just can't be making those type of mistakes. You're not going to be in an NBA rotation if you're doing that. You have to be locked in every single possession, and that's something Charles Lee's talked to him about. And Nick Smith said, he has a little bit of a track record, I think, of he has really high effort plays where you're like, wow, look at Nick Smith hustle, look at him play. And then he just has plays where he switches off. And I don't know if it's fatigue. I don't know if it's mental fatigue. I'm not sure what it is. But he knows, and the staff know that something needs to cut out. I still think there's still some over dribbling at times, although I'll say it's got much, much, much better since last summer league. I think he's beginning to find an identity of who he is as a combo guard, and that bounce is feeling better now than it did last year. Still some sloppy turnovers. He had a bad one, I think, where he tried to throw it back out to Brandon Miller, completely unforced, and he threw it back court. There's no reason for that turnover. That's just carelessness. It wasn't even forced by the defense. But that's something he needs to work on. What else here? He had a really bad foul at the end of the half where I think it was an intentional foul. Didn't know the Knicks were in the bonus. and the Knicks ended up getting 2 free throws to end the half, which is like a cardinal sin for any NBA player to do that. Again, have to improve that awareness, Nick, of what the foul situation is on the floor. Again, those moments of just like coming and going of focus, I think, are there as well. Look, I don't want to touch on like all the good stuff, like the shooting. He had the turnaround jumper about like 10, 15 feet out, little spin cycle. That was good. He had a nice floater in the paint. He obviously shot the ball well. Those are all things that I think are really obvious. That's why I say I don't want to touch on them, because if anyone who watched the game or watched the highlights, you will have seen these things. I don't need to tell you that he did these. I'm trying to pick out the things behind the obvious, which maybe you might not have noticed as you're watching other things or whatever else is going on. He also had another bad foul where I think he was on the back of someone trying to contest from behind, and he like jumped into the back of him. Again, like these are things you just can't be picking up, those type of fouls. Like people are going to target you if they know that you're going to be jumping like that on defense. So overall, I think it was a good game from Nick Smith Jr. Shots fell. But again, I've said this for a while. Like Nick Smith, for him to be an effective NBA player, his shot needs to be falling. And it's just really hard to be someone like, if you're that jump shot reliant, although less so in last night's game, if you're that jump shot reliant, you need to be hitting shots for you to be helping your team. If not, you're probably hurting it. I still feel like that at the moment. One last thing. He had a really nice pick and roll position, finding Brandon Miller out the corner, left corner. Drove, faked that he was going to lay up, kicked it out. It was just a really simple play, but like something where it feels like the game slowed down a little bit. I think Nick drove knowing Brandon Miller was there, and he only drove to try and draw the defense, just showing some kind of more advanced reading of the defense, which I thought was impressive. Okay, let's go on to the one that everyone's been waiting for, Tidjane Salaun. Came off the bench in this game. I think there was a little concern about some of his conditioning, maybe. Finished with 8 points, 7 rebounds, 1 personal foul, no turnovers, no steals or blocks. Shot 3 of 7 from the field, 0 from 3 from 3-point line, and 2 of 4 from the free throw line. Only played 14 minutes, but I will say, really made his presence felt in those 14 minutes. Like on defense, I think he had 2 or 3 plays. He just takes space away from the opposing offensive player and makes guys uncomfortable. Like you can see it straight from the start. Just he gets that, I don't know, 6 inches closer than any normal defender does when contesting a shot or when defending a post up. Like he just gets into guys and people feel that. And he forced a really good miss from a mid-range shot. He had another kind of poke away where someone tried to post him up, and he was able to reach around, use that 7'1" wingspan, all that length to do that. So the defense already looked like it was kind of like making an impact, which was good to see. The 3-point shot wasn't great. Took 3 threes. Both, I think all of them were maybe off the dribble or off relocation. Some bad misses in there. I did a big shooting breakdown. I think it might still even be pinned on my Twitter profile. You can find it. Off the dribble, Tidjane Salaun is not a great shooter. Off the catch, he is, but he didn't really get that opportunity so far. I think one of those shots was like an end of clock late situation. But yeah, I'm looking at my shoot stats here. Off the dribble, Salaun shot enough step backs. He shot 36% off the dribble and 20% off step backs. On the catch and shoots, he shot 41%. So that starts to tell you here a little bit about he wants to be getting those open catch and shoots, and those are open catch and shoots, I should say. And he didn't really get any of those. So, but the shot still looked smooth. He took it with confidence that I liked. He didn't look hesitant. I don't think he's going to be, even though we all think he's raw. I don't think Salaun thinks that. Like, I think he's pretty confident in himself, and I think he'll need that being an 18-year-old rookie in the NBA. What else with Tidjane? One thing I noticed, that there was one moment he kind of slid on a drive and he ended up fouling a guy for an hour. And as he was like sliding, the guy got to the paint for go for a layup, and Salaun didn't jump to try and block the shot. Or something like that during the pre-draft process last season, which is strange for a 6'10" guy with athleticism and 7'1" wingspan. But he just doesn't jump when trying to contest shots when people drive to the rim. I don't know if that's because he doesn't want to foul. Well, in this case, he did. or I'm not quite sure what the idea is there. I wonder if that's something the staff will try and work on him on in terms of contesting the rim and protecting the rim a little bit better. Salaun was super active on the offensive glass. I think this is one of the things that stood out. This and running the floor hard. He finished with 3 offensive rebounds in only 14 minutes of play. Just quick, strong, attacks the glass, reads it well. Will bring an element of physicality there. I think that really jumps out. He went coast to coast for the and one. That was great. The ability to put the ball on the floor, like he doesn't look great when he dribbles, but it was pretty effective. And when he got to show it, went coast to coast, drew the and one again, showed good strength. Had another transition basket where he caught it, I think from Xavier Simpson, and had a nice catch in traffic, and then finished it for another and one. So I think showing some good strength at 18 to be finishing through those and ones, that's really encouraging to see. And good body control as well to attack those. So they were 2 big plays. I thought his running in transition, his defense, and his activity in the offensive glass were the things that stood out to me most. Despite the great catch in transition, there were, I think, 2 other times where he fumbled passes or that he should have got. One was, I think, a nice look from Brandon Miller, which he fumbled under the basket. Another one was, I think, a defensive rebound where it kind of came to him and he fumbled it. And he does look a little bit clumsy at times. Like, he has got an element of that to him. So he needs to work on, securing the ball, but hopefully that will come. But yeah, overall, I was actually pretty encouraged. I mean, I said to Chase, I think on the draft night stream, Salaun is going to look rough in Summer League. Like, coming over to America, a new 3-point line, a different type of basketball he's never played with, a new system, the language barrier. He's been injured, so he's not even been able to play and have his full wind and conditioning. There's a long list of reasons for Tidjane Salaun to have looked pretty bad in his first game, and I thought he looked fine. And for that to be the case at that young, I think that was actually an encouraging start from my expectations, but still a long way to go to improve. Okay, that is everything recapping the Hornets' first Summer League game. We're going to have more podcasts coming this week. I think Hornets and Heartbreak are going to have something after the next 2 games. Me and Chase will be back next Tuesday to be recapping probably the end of Summer League by that point. And look, I think it could get a little rough from here. Mo Gee is still out injured. Bryce McGowan has gone to another team. Brandon Miller is not going to be playing anymore. There's not going to be many people left on this Hornets team. We're going to be starting like Brandon Slater, Nick Smith Jr. It's going to get a little bit rough here, I think, and the rest of Summer League. But look, this team are continuing to compete well. I've enjoyed watching this team. It's brought me joy. For the first time, watching Summer League has actually been enjoyable for the Charlotte Hornets. So I'm looking forward to the rest of the games, even though I think they could be a struggle. But make sure you tune in for future episodes. Hopefully you enjoyed my solo thoughts. And please give me some feedback on the solo pod, because this is the first time I've done a 30-minute solo pod by myself. So I appreciate that. We'll catch you next week.